Mm.
All right. So we are so lucky to have with us today someone who's very important to me, who I have been closely working with for several years, as a friend, colleague, and as a coach in our community. But most importantly, as somebody who holds really beautiful spaces for folks to process, be with, move through, and heal after loss. And it's such a treat to have you here, particularly speaking to our parent and caregiver community, Jenn. And with all of your experience in like embodied practice, from having been a yoga practitioner and teacher, and then moving really into the space of holding, and honoring folks in individual and in group settings who are experiencing loss and or moving through the previous loss. We're just so lucky to have you here. And I think what everyone should know as you're here listening in, like Jennifer's here with us on Zoom and folks who will be joining us on Facebook, those who are watching the replay, is that we're going to discuss something that we already know about, but we're going to go deeper with it and really take the time to be with this topic of healing after a loss.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure we understand like what happens when you skip steps in your grieving process and what can get in the way of that, of healing. And then we're going to hear from Jenn 3 key ways to turn the grieving process into an opportunity for growth and for awakening, and really deepening our relationships as a family as well. So lucky to have you here, Jenn. Thanks for taking the time to come and share your wisdom with us.
Yeah. Thank you, Vanessa. It's just always such a pleasure whenever I get to be with you and whenever I get to drop into your community. I've just received so much benefit from you and your teachings and wisdom and tools as a single mom of an 8-year-old fiery son. So it's just wonderful to be here and to be of service, because we're all moving through, some season of some kind of grief.
And that's really real. I think sometimes when we hear the word grief, we're thinking like, oh, it has to be a death of a family member to qualify as grief. And that is real grief as well.
Yeah.
There's so many different ways that we can experience loss. And so I just want you to know, if you're listening and you can relate in any way to this feeling of loss, like it could be loss of even a vision that you had for what the next year was going to be like right before the pandemic, and you lost that, you lost those opportunities, or that train that you were on, right? You had to figure out another way forward, or all the different ways that we can experience grief, whether it's the end of a relationship, and there's so many examples. So we just want you to know that all levels of loss are honored here. And what we're really doing too is getting a sense to get to know sadness and grief and kind of befriend it in a way so that it can feel like something we can experience and get something valuable out of when it arises, and not just try to get out of or get away from or avoid. And that's so healthy, and that builds resilience. So it's all connected to how we are with ourselves and our children.
Yeah.
So I guess I would like to know, Jenn, just for folks who don't know you yet, especially why is it so important to consciously address loss and grief? I mean, to the point where you're so passionate about it that you've made it the main focus of your life's work. What is it about processing grief that's so important?
Yeah, what I've noticed over time in doing this work is that what happens when we don't, there can be such a cost to our physical body. If, like what you're saying, we're like avoiding, we just want to get through. We want to just push down every negative emotion, and we just want to do whatever skillful or unskillful action, right? So there's so many things that, addictions to food, to prescription drugs, non-prescription drugs,
Right.
alcohol, overworking, there are all of these things that we see in our culture that we
Yeah.
do, these habits that are not really beneficial to our well-being. They're not beneficial to our families. They're not beneficial, to our spirit. And we get stuck in those habits because we're pushing down the natural emotions that are upwelling in the grief process. So that can really, there are all kinds of statistics that, we're 6 times more susceptible to heart attack after a major loss, their blood clots, stroke, there are all of these very real health issues that, that raise way high because, when we experience a loss, our stress is much higher, our immune
That's
system
right.
goes down. So we have to take extra good care of ourselves
Right.
after a loss. And when we're moving through a grief process, like extra nurturing. And often we go the other direction, and people, I'll hear from women, especially, I lost my mom 6 years ago, but now I'm working 3 jobs and I never slowed down and I never paused to feel the emotions. And now I'm realizing the toll that it actually took, on my family, on my relationships, So, so I think we can really do ourselves a disservice by ignoring the grief process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can be kind of culturally normalized to kind of just like suppress the grieving process and just push through. But then I've recently been investigating emotions with my group, my clients, and one of the things that stood out to me was we will do almost anything to avoid the experience of pain or to get out of pain, including like self-harm and like even in these subtle ways of just like not taking good care of ourselves, just like whatever, like to avoid the experience of pain. Will even harm others and become less of like a different kind of person than we were before we were in pain. And so grief can be one of the most painful things people experience.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we want to shelter children from that pain, and so we don't necessarily share with them honestly and openly like what it is to have sadness around loss. And so this is really relevant to this group. At what age do you think you should start including children in conversations around things like loss and death and grief?
Yeah.
And what are the benefits of doing that? Because I think a lot of us really just don't want to even like go there, but like, yeah, help us understand.
Yeah. So I think that children can be included in the full spectrum of adult living from the day they're born. I mean, obviously we want to nest at the very beginning. We want to, infants, we want to have those first 40 days, right? And of course, we slowly bring our children out into the world, as they develop. But for me, I don't see there's a particular age, like, well, once they turn 12 or once they turn X, that it's really like how you teach, Vanessa, right? It's about, well, we have to raise our own resilience as adults. We have to work on our own emotional regulation skills. And how do we, how do we do these
Right.
techniques? How do we, right? We want to figure that out as adults first. So we can't model a healthy relationship to emotions after a loss for kids if we're not doing it ourselves. So first, it's really about, figuring out how we can show up for ourselves. And then we're just being a model for our kids. We're just modeling for them. And I would just recommend, you don't need to take your kids away. The very first memorial service that I officiated for a woman who I knew through a yoga community, her father had died. They made a decision to keep the children at home. And they ended up bringing them for the second half. And I really encouraged them to include the kids because children are wiser than we give them credit for, and they really, they can handle death, and it makes sense to them that things die and things are born. And we're really doing a disservice because then, for sheltering our kids, and then they become adults and they're like, well, I've never been to a funeral and I don't know anything because my parents kept me sort of sheltered. Right. So, my son, we've had conversations around the table. I remember, I think when he was in kindergarten, we talked at length about death and the different types of burial. And, he got into, he said that if it was legal, he would prefer a sky burial is what he wanted. And he would want his body to have little papers on it with, and I said, well, what would the papers say? He said, well, they would be like wishes and prayers from people, and they could roll them up and put them on my body. And I said, would you want flowers on your body? He said, oh, I want all my stuffed animals. And I said, oh, would you want to give your stuffed animals away to a friend, after you die so that they could use them? He said, no, I like them to be on my body. Like I want them to come.
Oh,
okay. So we
yeah.
had this whole conversation so that, you never want your child to die. But, if my son happened to die last year, or the year before, whatever, that conversation actually would give me a ton of comfort, because I would put all of his stuffed animals on his body, and I'd have everybody write wishes and prayers on papers and put them between the stuffed animals. And it that came from him, that came from him. So I think in our culture, even when people are, have elderly parents who are in hospice and are clearly on their way in the next year to die.
Yes.
When my grandmother was 95 and she died last year, and we had a whole hospice team and a social worker, we were having conversations, and she was very uncomfortable having a conversation with me. Like, would you want me there? When you die, I'd like to be there. And she was just like shaking and so uncomfortable, because it's just not something that was a comfortable conversation with her, probably as a child or ever, really. So I think that we can model our own comfort around things. And first we have to get comfortable ourselves, right, with having those conversations.
That's right.
So
that's right.
It all starts with us. And then wherever we are, that ripples out to our children, just like anything else.
Just like anything else. That's so true. And I think what stands out to me about your perspective and what you're bringing to us is that, kids are, they are already curious about it. And what the discomfort, some of it is there just because it's like a concept to wrap your head around that's new and different, and it can feel a little like, I don't know, there's like, oh wait, what? Like at some point I'm not here anymore and you're not here anymore. But what I've always said is, like, with these topics, follow their curiosity. Like if they're asking questions, I think sometimes you end up just answering with a question. Well, what do you think? And like, but being able to know that this is a safe topic. This is something that they can bring to you, that you can talk about, that you can start to make meaning of. You can start to, see examples in the world and understand it. It's so important for kids to feel that way about all the emotions and all the facts of life, right? So I love this, and thank you, because I know a lot of parents in particular are like looking for guidance on like, how do we navigate that grandma's sick and might die, right? How do we navigate that? Do we replace the goldfish with an identical goldfish, or do we talk about the fact that the goldfish died, right? So thank you. This is really useful. And when you said it starts with us, I mean, that's where I'm starting to think about, these tips, these ideas that you have for us. I think you had 3 in particular around processing grief and healing after a loss. You're going to be sharing those with us in a moment, but help us understand, like, so we know what can happen if you don't. What are the benefits to acknowledging a loss and intentionally stepping into a grieving process and a healing process?
Yeah. So on the flip side, right, we can have all of these challenges if we don't, but if we do, how I like to think about it is that just like people go on, they go on a healing journey when they get a diagnosis with cancer, right? My dad had a cancer diagnosis, and at first it was like, I'm battling cancer, I'm researching cancer. And then he shifted perspective, and my dad turned his cancer diagnosis into a healing journey. And he said, you know what, I'm going to go on a healing journey, whether or not I cure this cancer, right? So for me, after my dad died, the invitation to me from my mentor was, now you can go on a journey with grief. You can let grief be your teacher all year long and walk with it and let it teach you through every season and every milestone and every holiday. And that gave me a lot of peace And I really took that to heart. I had no idea really what it meant, but I was like, all right, I guess I'll let grief teach me. And it's been over 10 years now since that time. And
Right.
what I see now is now I understand grief to be a journey, not just an emotion. So sometimes we think, oh,
Yeah.
grief equals intense sadness. For me, grief equals a process. And we can go through a really deep process if it's like the death of our partner, our child, our parent, or,
Right.
it might be a smaller loss and it's not as deep of a process, but I see it as a journey, and we can learn a ton about our resilience. We can learn a ton about all the emotions, because when we have a big loss like that, there's anguish, there's despair, there's anger, there's sadness,
Right.
there's betrayal. I mean, there are all of these things, but there's also when we move through the process and befriend it a little bit and go, okay, I'm going to go on this. We can also learn. I learned a lot about presence and gratitude and joy and pleasure also in my grieving journey. So grief is big enough to hold all of that. And what happens is when you move the energy, because there's so much energy that comes in the grieving process,
Yeah.
then there's this huge capacity for creativity and for new growth. So you kind of think of it as the seasons, right? If you're living through winter and it feels like everything, there's nothing there. It feels frozen and empty. But then there's this spring that comes up. So if you let the garden really go and winter down, there's lots of new growth potential,
Mm.
and possibility for creation and new purpose, and more living and more love on the other side of the process. So that's why you'd want
Right.
to step in.
And that invitation or that potential makes it sound like maybe it'd be worth it to experience some of the pain,
Yeah.
because there's something waiting for you on the other side of the winter, right? There's something that could really add meaning to your life and help you grow into more of who you're meant to be.
Mhm.
I always try to see, because as a gratitude researcher, and practitioner, it's just, what is the gift in this?
Yeah.
And I'm hearing so many, like, getting to experience this full range of emotions is such a gift in itself, of like a human experience. And then also I'd say I'd like to do it with others too in a meaningful way. Like, I remember being with my relatives when my grandfather passed, and he was like the pillar of our family. My mom only my mom's being second to him. She's the pillar. But when he went, it's like the people were lost for words. They didn't really know how to share that experience. They hadn't really had it modeled to them. And I remember leading the remarks of just like, how do we even start here? And we started with like, what are the gifts that you're grateful for that he gave to you? And just one question helped to bring us together and actually come together in community. And I also know that not everybody has the opportunity to do that. Like, that could have gone a lot of different ways. People would be like, I can't do this. People leaving, like, right. I just happened to land on a question that worked for everybody. But it's I've seen so many people isolated in their grief. And one thing that I really admire about your perspective, Jen, is like, this invitation that says like, look, there's this universal thing that we are all experiencing with different situations, but similar journey and process that we're in. How can we share this and make meaning of our experiences together, so we're not doing it alone? And even just having your company, but then also the invitation to be with others. And I think a lot of people are scared of doing that because they're worried that seeing and witnessing other people's grief is going to trigger their own, and they're going to then have even more pain that they need to process. I wanted you to speak to that, because I know that you have a free training coming up, and it is in a more of a group setting where like people don't have to, necessarily share intimately what they're experiencing, but there is a lot of like community that's built around it. And I'm curious, like, what you would say to folks who are like, oh no, like I process my pain in private only, and they're like, and they're worried about going to something and it being like too much for them to handle. Like,
Yeah.
what is it about like how you approach it that would be especially supportive in that sort of group setting? Curious.
Yeah. It's interesting because I do hear that sometimes, like I need to do this on my own. Right. And we have that
Yeah.
tendency. And I think that is so true to an extent, right? And we're all unique, and some people are more introverted, some
Yeah.
people are more extroverted. We all process differently, right?
Yeah.
And for all of us, we need a little bit of time on our own, that is true. And what I recommend for folks is take your alone time as much as you can in nature, being outside, being in the sun, being in the wind, going to water, being on the earth. And that can be so healing. And we do need that time. And in my perspective, that you're not actually alone, right? When you do that, because you're with the trees and you're with the sun and you're interconnected in nature. But we do need community. And I think that it's an opportunity for us to practice. How can we show up and mirror each other and see ourselves in each other and be witnessed, because that's what we get from a community, is like we get to be seen, we get to be heard, we get to be witnessed, and that's very healing. And we can do that in a way that we don't need to take on other people's suffering. We can
So
be
key.
there, and that's why in all of my group sessions, there are practices that we do first. We do grounding, we pull all of the pieces of ourselves back, we find our center, we breathe. And once we're grounded in ourselves, then we can sit back a little bit and just witness, okay, what's going on for Vanessa? And I can hear her, I can witness her, but I don't need to be like, oh, now I'm feeling all of that in my body, right? So, and that's a skill, especially for those of us that are a little more sensitive, that is really beneficial for us to build, so that we can then show up in spaces and be compassionate for other people, and not walk away feeling overwhelmed and burnt out and heavy because, right. Yeah.
If anything, lighter, because in the way, somehow when you collectively witness, it lifts out, it like lightens everybody. And it seems like it'd be the opposite, but it's not. Like I've experienced this in your spaces that you've held. Like you held some space for my current immersion clients, or journeying a year with me and with each other. And one person in particular just like had a lot that she got to express, and I had people telling me afterward that it was really healing for them to witness her express it, versus like what we might wrongly assume, that it was somehow burdening other people. Like I think there's this myth out there that if you share your grief, you're burdening others because you're making them feel you're like a downer or something.
Yes.
The opposite was true here. And I think what she was able to say too is that like she just felt so much lighter, that she finally put together this like photo montage she'd been wanting to do of all the loved ones she had lost. And it was like this kind of kickstarted her grieving process to be witnessed and to be with everybody, like holding that space. And so it was so mutually beneficial in every direction.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I was curious about, like, so if we were to right now identify, okay, yes, experience the loss, I'd like some relief from this. Like, what would be some like, I think you had 3 tips, prepared for us today, potentially, right, about this. And then I know that to go deeper with us, they would be checking out your three-part event over 3 days, so just give us a little flavor of what we might be experiencing in your event, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the first tip that I would say is to really find your ground and find your support. So if you recognize, gosh, I just had this loss, and maybe it's from years ago, but I'm just starting to feel it now because I just slowed down, or I just lost my job and now I'm feeling my retirement and the loss of this or whatever. We want to just first acknowledge, oh, this is what's in the room. I need to acknowledge it, because the very first, like what you mentioned with pain, I had an aunt who died from an overdose of pain medication that she abused over the course of 10 years, and that is I want to say, and I don't know the research right now, but I think it's the number one killer in the United States is pain medication. And it wasn't even on her death certificate. It said asphyxiation because she choked on the pills, right? So how many of us have died of overdose prescription pain? Like we're we're trying to self-medicate ourselves for pain. So anyway, that's an aside. And I've just, it took me 10 years to really start grieving her, because that was such a shock for the whole family. She was my dad's younger sister. And it was like, I wasn't even home for the funeral, and everyone was like, total shock.
Right.
So, coming back around, so acknowledging what's in the room, like, wow, this is in the room. I just recognized that that's why my aunt died. Oh my goodness. I was just not even acknowledging that. It took me years and years, right? And there's that layer of grief that came up. So if we can do that first, and we can dance with sort of our coping mechanisms, right? They can be some skillful, some not so skillful. I can still do a little bit of Jerry's. I can still watch a little Netflix. So I'm not saying, you have to be always present and, perfectly like acknowledging things 24/7. But if we can just say, okay, I'm going to acknowledge this, recognize this, take a few breaths, breathe into it, and then come into our bodies. Because often what happens, the suffering happens up here, because then we get into the past, and then we get into a story loop, and then we stay
we like time travel with minds and
time travel,
and then get stuck,
and then we're stuck in the past, and we're not embodied, we're not in our bodies. So the next piece is, how can I come back to myself? And some of that is physically. We can rub our hands together, we can put our hands on our bodies, we can lie on the ground and feel our back on the earth. We can, I used to do this when I was in New York City, sit up against a tree and feel my spine against a tree and go, okay, there's a tree, there's the earth, here's my body, right? And breathe and really feel the ground, the physical ground underneath us, and come back into our bodies. And then we can do that with our breath. We can do that with some sound. We can put on music, we can hum or sing, and that brings us back into our physical form. So that would be a tip when you notice, like, oh my gosh, I just had this flood of emotions, this memory of my aunt, whatever the loss is. You go, okay, that's what's here. If you're a journaler, you can write down, wow, I just remembered my Aunt Angie, acknowledging, one sentence, 10 seconds. You could be in the middle of your workday, like, whoa, that just came up. I'm going to just take a note, get into your physical body. And then what's really helpful is to then, the thirdly is to move that emotional energy. So it doesn't get stuck in the tissues. We want to do some kind of movement, and that movement could be passive. So it could be a massage, right? You could go and get a foot massage, a full body massage, right? Rolling out on a foam roller or something. So it doesn't have to be like a workout, like I got to go,
I see,
like lift weights, right? Or it could be go and lift some weights, go and take a walk. It's very healing to move the body in that simple walking fashion. It's like someone
that rhythm.
That's an EMDR specialist said, oh, that's actually a form of EMDR, like to do that walking pattern. So just getting out and simply going for a walk around the block to clear, and just okay, this is what's present. I don't necessarily have to think about it the whole walk, but just acknowledge it and then walk and let it move. And that's what I've noticed over time when I've gone to bereavement groups that have been all talking, which
talking and sitting.
Talking and sitting. There's a lot of sitting and a lot of talking. And what I noticed in these groups, I would go week after week, is, gosh, a lot of the people that are still really suffering, like my husband died 8 years ago, and I've been coming to this group for 4 years, or, they were not getting massages. They were not swimming or dancing or walking. They didn't have a lot of movement. And I think that that's an essential component to moving through painful emotions that come after any kind of loss. So
makes sense. Yeah. There's so much to harness there. It's like you don't have to effort with your mind to make the thing move. You actually just do the things that your body's already accustomed to doing, or maybe trying some new things that your body will respond well to. Like I remember you had us do this like shaking motion for one, where you just like shake everything, and you do it like, you don't just go, oh, just shake it off kind of thing, but like, no, you do it for like a solid minute. And I don't know that I've done shaking for a solid minute before, but I honestly felt like lighter after I moved something, and there's some sounds. And I think like one thing I really like about your work, Jen, that stands out to me is how much you harness the body's natural intelligence on how to process emotion.
Yeah.
You know, I have a lot of cognitive strategies that I work with folks, and sort of structural, like kind of like family system kind of things. But like it's move it or lose it kind of, right? It's like kind of the motto here. So I'm hearing acknowledge, come back to the body, and then move the body. And those three, like what a powerful combo. And it can be this long or this long, right? It can be moments, and it can be hours or days. So it's just depending on like what feels like you can bring into your life. Now I know that there's a particular format that you do like to bring people through, though. That's over 3 days. Is that right?
Yeah. So, depending on how long I have with folks, I'll often, if I am offering a 90-minute session, we'll do things in the time that we have. Even my clients that are in my year-long program, I do give them little bite-sized things, because it's
Right.
hard, especially when we're going through a grieving process. Everything feels harder, everything
Always.
feels
Right.
hard. So, how can I just break this down to a minute at a time? Or like, I'm just going to do this for 3 minutes or just 1 minute, make it really easy, really digestible. And we can really get ourselves through those extremely hard moments with just a 1 to 3 minute exercise. And I think
that's so important to be able to have those. And I guess what I mean is like, you've got this event coming up that's designed over 3 days. So like, tell us a little bit about what people can, can expect to experience in that. And my gosh, how generous of you to make it free. Like, that's incredible. Like, I don't think you all understand how valuable and how impactful the work that like it can help you for years, and it can actually kickstart a whole journey like it has for her year-long clients, for example. But what is it about the day format that's coming up that you really are excited about for folks and what they'll experience?
Yeah, I'm really excited that number one, people are going to get to connect with other people. So, that's, I think, the community piece is really wonderful, because we can do one-on-one work with a therapist. And that is fantastic. And I recommend people work with a therapist and work with me and a group, you know what I mean? That we can have layers of support, and that's fantastic. But often, there's just so much more that comes when we can be in community. So that's something that's an option. Nobody ever needs to share in any of my free events, but often people are so grateful to have the opportunity, especially after they've been on for an hour and they feel really comfortable. And there's a small group, and then there's an opportunity to, here's what's going on for me, and then to be seen and witnessed. And you walk away lighter after that. So that's one thing that folks can expect. And then it'll be experiential. So I do have some slides. I do offer that for the folks who are visual people, but we'll be doing a lot of experiential practices, so that you can, okay, well, let me do a 3-part check-in and notice, well, okay, there's body scan. How's my mind? How's my heart? Okay, that's what's going on. Let me jot that down. And then now I'm going to do, oops, sorry about that. My phone hasn't been ringing for weeks, and it's the first time it rang. So
that's a surprise. Yeah.
Surprise. And then we can do a practice, and then notice again, oh, wow, that was only 3 minutes. And I'm noticing that my chest feels different. My heart feels different. We can affect our heart rate in just 3 minutes. It's like,
well,
wow.
also, I just want to acknowledge too, like, there are so many yoga videos out there. Some people do end up doing them on their own, but like, how much more compelling is it when you actually like go to a class and there's an instructor and there's other students, and you can kind of like go through the experience together. For many people, that's a huge motivation hack, and it helps them to actually like stick with the idea I think a lot of people do like the idea of feeling joy again after a loss. That's the name of her event, by the way. Um, and yet, like, they're like, well, that sounds nice, but I'll get around to it eventually. It's like, wait a minute. There's actually an event designed to lead you through a process, just like if you were like, oh, I want to get better at mountain biking, go take a mountain biking class or something, right? Like whatever it is. Um, this is here for you. So if you or someone that in your life has experienced a loss recently, or not even recently, just like you can tell, like, could really use some community around it, or maybe you would love to do it with somebody,
Mhm.
um, or maybe this is just for you. I highly recommend that you sign up for Jen's event. She's an incredible facilitator, and you'll be so well cared for, and creates these beautiful spaces for us to all honor each other and ourselves and our processes. Um, and you end up leaving, yeah, uplifted and lighter and more joyful and connected and relieved, like, oh gosh, yeah, I did it finally, like I didn't made the time for it.
Yeah.
So if you feel like you would like to bring that, like, deeper connection back into your life, that heaviness of loss is weighing on you, and you'd like to have more feelings of peace and happiness, and just kind of transform that feeling of everything will fall apart without me into finally being able to receive nourishment and support. A lot of times when people are in pain and grieving, they do and like take care of everybody else so that they don't have to face how they're feeling. And this is an invitation to get into those feelings, you get some support around it in community in a way that's really accessible. And like, once you do it, you'll be like, are you kidding? This is like so okay. Like our just even our acknowledge, be in the body, and move the body.
Yeah.
Sounds like so simple, but it's powerful. It's powerful and it's incredible to do together. So if you at all, or even just curious to check out this process that Jenn has developed, I really recommend you, go ahead and click the link and sign up and get into Jenn's world and really be a part of a community of people who are saying, like, we deserve this, like we deserve to be able to process our grief. We deserve to be in community. We don't have to do this alone. And we all get to heal,
Yeah.
from our losses. We don't have to just carry around our wounds.
Yeah.
So, Jenn, thank you so much for your work in the world. We're so like honored to have a chance to host you and be a part of, your world as well. And everybody who, yeah, if you haven't yet, like just, go ahead and copy the link, share it with others, click on it, learn some more about the event, sign up. It's free. There's no risk here. Worst case is you end up walking away with some really great ideas. So, Jenn, any last thing you wanted to just share, like an encouraging word or thought as we wrap up?
Yeah, I think my encouraging word is what's coming up is gentleness. I feel like,
Yeah.
we can get so serious and so, well, I've got to get this done and I got to, it's just, we're just moving from one thing to the next thing. And we can get really, I know, I just speaking for myself, I can get really hard on myself. Um, and
Sure.
especially when there's some grieving process or some loss, I'm functioning at really low capacity. And then it's like, well, I know I should be functioning up here because that's what I normally do. And then, brain fog and fatigue and exhaustion, there's all of this
Right.
just brings our capacity way down. So if you
Yeah.
have experienced a loss, like, especially if it's a big one, just know your capacity is much lower than it would be if everything is flowing and, it's just all so much celebration, right? So give yourself a big break and, offer yourself some radical gentleness and radical rest and radical self-care and go, wow, I just need way more sleep, naps, baths, massages, just go as far as you can off the deep end of self-care because we really need it
Yeah.
to bolster ourselves up um, and just know that this too shall pass. It really, such a simple phrase, but if you're feeling like, oh wow, I'm really at the bottom of the well down here, that it can't stay there for long, that everything is going to shift. Everything is going to
Yeah.
shift. And as you touch into those moments that feel like anguish or that feel, like despair or anger or bittersweet or whatever they are, that also you're growing your resilience, right? And your capacity to feel more joy, to feel more hope, to feel more, elation. And we just become more, I don't know, brighter in our capacity for humanness, if that's a
It
thing.
is a thing. I
Yeah,
think it is. I think you just made it a thing.
I
It's
just
so
made it a
true.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's very intuitive. Like when you say it, though, that lands really well. It just makes sense. Yeah, and gosh, please don't do it alone. Like come and if you're listening to this, that means that you're at least inclined to, consider what it might look like to, bring in a mentor and be with others in the process of healing. Well, I feel very hopeful. Thank you for this uplifting time with you, Jenn. And yeah, thanks for that final word, gentleness and radical self-care. Yeah.
Thank you, Vanessa.
All right. Yeah. And hopefully see many of you at Jenn's event. It does start next week. And oh wait, is that right? Yes. I
Next
got the right
Wednesday.
date right.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's right. Next Wednesday. So a week from today. Gives you a little time to plan for it, and more details and look. So just go click and check it out, and sign up if it feels appropriate, and share with those that you feel could benefit from it. And I think that's where we'll wrap. And Jenn is in our world, but she makes these special events available only certain times of the year. So this isn't a special opportunity. So this is something that you are inclined to do. I just encourage you to go ahead and take her up on this event right now, so you don't need to put anything off for more months. Yeah, and be in that support and community now. All right, lots of love to everybody. Take care, and we'll be back for another Monday Mindset in the Raising Our Resilience group, Monday at noon. And I'll be looking forward to sharing some other emotionally supportive tips and tricks, especially for children and parents, for what parents can use with their kids. And I'll see you then, and hopefully at Jenn's event next week. All right, take care, everybody. Bye for now.
Bye for now.